A lot of you will have seen this before, but just for those of you who haven't, there are people who out there over centuries have actually planned and thought about how you can destroy a society by attacking it in a psychological, sociological way, psychopolitics. And the Russians or the Soviets were very good at looking at this, and the bit down here in red, to produce chaos in the culture of an enemy. Well, this country's in chaos, isn't it? You know it. I know you know it, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But it's a fact. If you talk to people in the pub, they're always complaining about something doesn't work. The local school, where the teachers have now got to have a new camera. When they go out on trips with the children, they've got to have a special, sorry, not a camera, a special mobile phone that doesn't have a camera. So what the local education authority is saying to the teachers at the school, we think you're paedophiles. But the teachers are going to get that phone because they've been told to do it. And it's interesting what John said about saying no. So here we've got the sign of people who are prepared to attack us by doing nasty, devious things with our minds. We've got to know about the Frankfurt School, because this is one of the early schools in the 1920s where psychiatrists and psychologists came together to learn the techniques. What can we do to mess up people's minds? What did you do at work, darling? Well, I spent the morning before coffee working out how to make somebody temporarily insane. Nice, but these people exist. It migrated, and we've already heard talk about the Fabians. And the Fabian Society from the late 1800s is designed to implement socialism by a slow, creeping, subversive effect. And that's why you've got many MPs, particularly in the Labour Party, who are full-time Fabian members, but they never tell you. And of course, good old Tony the Blair was chairman of the Fabian Society. And in this stained glass window, here's the men hammering the world into the shape of their choice. They're not going to ask you because you're just cattle. But they, the elitist Fabians, are going to decide how the world is re-engineered. And you and I are being re-engineered by them at the moment. If we go and look at the Communist Manifesto, that's what it said was going to happen. Property taken away. Get rid of the family. Why do you get rid of the family unit? Because then the children are lost. They're vulnerable. They're going to abolish countries. Isn't that happening? That's what the EU is doing. And do you know that Africa is shortly to join the European Union? And within Africa, they are already starting to regionalise it. And we have a document which showed an exhibition within the European Commission where Africa was being divided up into regions and the boundaries of the countries destroyed. And we're seeing a massive attack on religion. And don't be fooled by the cuddly one world religion bit, because that's part of the other side. So when you see lots of happy, clappy people in the churches and they're all talking about cuddling all of the other denominations, be very careful, because that is the road towards the one world church, but it's not a church of Christ. A little more evidence of what's going on, that the Communist International, the international movement of communists, discussed regionalising everything, getting rid of nations, controlling their economies, and heading towards what they said, that's their words, not mine, the New World Order. And you've now heard Mr. Blair and Obama openly talking, and Bush, of course, talking about the New World Order, one world government. They are so arrogant, they believe the quality of their personalities is so perfect, they are capable of ruling the world. That's frightening. That's scary. Now, this is an interesting little paper on the subject of mental health, and I've got a copy of it here, and it was written by a guy called Colonel Rawlings Rees. And he was an army officer. It's always the Pongos that cause the trouble, trust the sailors. And he was interested in psychiatry, and in 1940 he produced this little paper about mental health and how, when the war was won, our people, these are the words he uses, our people will change the way people think. We will educate them into being normal. And in this paper on page 2, he actually says, I've highlighted it, he actually says the most difficult area for our people to penetrate will be the law and medicine. Now, this man later went on to be intimately connected with the Tavistock Institute, which is here in London. And if you do your research on the Tavistock Institute, they've specialised over many years in learning how to mess around with people's minds. They're very dangerous. This man was British. The evidence is written evidence. I don't need to do much to show what was going on in his mind, and he wasn't doing it for fun. What about this man, Mr. Mosley? His family, still very big in something. And here he was. Was he a fascist? I think so. Was he a Nazi? We could argue about that. But he was very big in Plymouth, where I come from. And there's one of his parades. But this is interesting because this is a comment on Mr. Mosley the fascist by Michael Foot, a Labour MP, highly respected by some, and a socialist. And he describes Mosley as a wonderful rising star. But isn't that a bit strange that you've got a left-wing socialist describing a right-wing fascist as a wonderful person? I'm just going to say to you, it's because they're all liars. They want you to believe there's left and right, and while your brain is hopping between the two, they drive through the policy in the middle. Now, this document should be blasted over all of the national papers, but it's never been seen in the national papers. It's real. Now, this was mentioned by Christopher Story this morning. It was written in 1942 by the Nazis, printed in Berlin, Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, or something equivalent to that. And it basically is the blueprint for the European Economic Community. And if you bother to read that document, and I think there is an English translation on the internet, they were talking about one Europe, one transport system, one currency. And in it, I believe I'm correct in saying, dear old England was to be de-industrialised. We were to be for a certain amount of agriculture, not grain, because that was all going to be in Eastern Europe, and tourism, because they were a bit upset with us. So the plan was to strip out anything which put the great into Great Britain. That's a real document. They weren't playing. And if you go through the Nazi document and you look at what is happening to this country and has happened, everything's happened. But no newspaper will print it. It's very curious. Now, this is an interesting group of people, the Bilderbergers. How many of you heard about those? It's not associated with McDonald's. It should be. So the Bilderbergers, created just after the war, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, well, he was a great guy because he was a confirmed Nazi. He's the first chairman, and these people start to meet in secret. Nobody quite knows what they discuss, but it's obvious that they start to pull in more and more powerful people. But we don't know what they talk about because they use the Chatham House rule. Beaky, if he's a problem, just open the door and... That's the MI5, what do they call it? Stooge. So, the Bilderbergers, we know their roots are very close to fascism, and at the end of the war, the material emerging is showing us that the Nazis weren't quite flattened. A lot of them simply moved location, and they took a lot of the wealth with them. And we know that in Spain, South America, through Europe and also the United States, various parts of the empire continued to tick along, except it became a corporate vehicle.